Good morning, everybody. We continue discussing about a source coding technique. Today, we will specifically discuss about what I noted earlier as the Huffman coding technique, a simple, intuitive one, but is a very effective scheme. Before that, let me tell you, though we will not discuss in much detail, some expression in a simplified form relating the entropy of a source Hx, the way we are noting, and the average number of bits, okay, for a binary coding that will be assigned per letter from the source. This n bar we have defined in the earlier class. We can see that n bar after some source coding scheme where we would like to go for a compact representation, n bar lies between h of x and h of x plus 1. There are several theorems relating this in a more general form, but we are only considering this topic of source coding as an example. And so, here is a very simplified version of the corresponding theorem, which is an elementary theorem in the source coding theory. There are more powerful and theorems relating to coding of not only source letters, but source sequence of letters together, and not only in terms of binary digits after coding, it could also be non-binary in general. But anyway, for a finite discrete source with entropy Hx and a binary code alphabet, this code alphabet is something new I am using for the first time. By this, we have already defined source alphabet x1, x2 up to x capital K. By code alphabet here I mean after coding, how do I represent these source letters x1, x2, x3, etc. So, when I say it is a binary code alphabet, it simply means that after coding the source letters, it will be 0 or 1. Okay. It could be non-binary in general. Anyway, so for a finite discrete source with entropy Hx and a binary code alphabet, it is possible, the theorem asserts that it is possible to assign code words, that means binary code words, to source letters such that prefix condition is satisfied. We have defined prefix condition, and the above inequality is valid. Okay. So, this inequality gives us a rough idea about how much is going to be n bar. It is going to be rather close to Hx. Okay. At the most, it can differ by 1 from Hx. So, if after your source coding scheme, if you come out with some source coding scheme on your own, okay, and if your code is uniquely decodable through a prefix conditioning criterion, then you can expect your n bar to lie in between these two. Okay. This of course is a simplified form of source coding when applied to coding source letters. One could also code groups of letters viewed as sequences. Okay. Now, we try to understand the basic style of Huffman coding through a small example. So, I say it is an example of Huffman coding, again especially for binary coding when the code alphabet is binary. Okay. There is a counterpart of Huffman coding which is applicable for non-binary coding as well. It is a bit complicated, it is not that necessary in this course. So, we are considering binary coding of following Huffman coding scheme.
What is the name of that coding for non-binary?
That is also Huffman coding, non-binary Huffman coding. Okay. So, here I have considered a small alphabet of 5 letters. Just arbitrarily I am noting the alphabets here as A1, A2, A3, okay, the same as x1, x2, x3 I was talking about earlier. So, assume that these are the source letters, okay, and these are the assigned corresponding probabilities known somehow, though this may be a problem in some practical cases, but let us assume that this is known really. Okay. Now, what I have done is, so we can say that the ensemble is defined, source ensemble, and we have arranged the letters such that the probability is decreasing downward. This is just one style. It need not be that A1 always has to have high probability, but this is just a special choice here that A1 has highest probability and like that A5 has the least probability of occurrence. Then Huffman coding says that first you arrange the letters in the descending order of probability, which is already done here. Then before you look at this, apply your common sense a little bit. See, the way we are defining source okay, and also the channel. It is interesting, it was not so intuitive when you brought in the idea of probability, but we defined the source alphabet and said that okay, we will describe the source in terms of its ensemble, which means that the probability also will be included here. Now, is it not that if I find that yes, the source letters have got different probabilities, all source letters are not equally probable. Okay. I can see A5 has got very small probability of occurrence compared to A1. If that is the case, then is it not intuitive that if a letter which is less likely to occur, I represent it over a binary code word, means group of binary digits, okay, which is longer in nature, longer in length, okay, compared to the coding of a source letter whose probability is higher. For example, if I leave it to you to give some kind of random coding to be applied on the source letters, so that you get the corresponding binary representation, then one simplest way is that to count. Okay, here I have got 5 letters, so I uniformly assign 3 bits per letter, because up to 8 symbols I can represent each of them by 3 bits without bothering about the probability aspect of that. But now that we are modeling the source letter with the respective probabilities as well, really, let us see how we can take advantage of that, and that is very simple, intuitive really. It is, and because we are also talking about, we have accepted some kind of variable length coding, okay, while we are satisfying the prefix conditioning. So, there is no ambiguity as such really, we can continue with that. And then a very natural way of doing it is that the source letter which is most probable should be represented by least number of bits, is not it, and the source letter which is least probable may have a larger representation, does not matter, ultimately we may win in terms of the average number of bits to be assigned per source letter, n bar. Okay. So, that is what effectively is Huffman coding. So, we can see Huffman coding says you arrange the letters in descending order of probability. Then for specifically for this binary coding scheme, consider last 2 letters with least 2 least probabilities, okay, like I am indicating by these horizontal lines here, and then assign 1 to one branch and 0 to the other branch. I have preferred to assign 1 to the lower branch, 0 to the upper branch. It is a kind of binary tree if you look at it. Okay. The tree is starting here. Okay. So, to this branch I am assigning 1, to the upper branch I will assign 0 by convention. You could decide otherwise, fine. And then go ahead, you also add the 2 probabilities. I have done this and I have noted the probability and I have assigned it to the emerging branch here. It is 0.2, sum of these 2 probabilities I have written here. So, this is one branch of the next level of the tree really. So, I will now compare that this 0.2, which is still the least now, okay, with the least probability of the remaining probabilities for the remaining source letters. These 2 added together gave me 0.2. I find out of the other source letters, this is the least probability of 0.25. So, I considered that as the other branch of the tree. I now have got 2 branches. Okay. This one has got probability 0.2, this branch has a probability of 0.25. Okay. Again I assign the same bits really, I assign 1 to the lower branch, 0 to the upper branch, and I add these 2 probabilities, 0.2 here, 0.25 here, I get 0.45 here to this emerging branch and the next level. Okay. Now, you can see it need not go in this direction always, it depends, all depends on the probability values, actual values really. Here I have a situation where now this probability of 0.45 is higher incidentally than both the probabilities for A2 and A1. Okay. So, instead of considering one branch, the other branch of the tree at this level, I have to go for the similar thing of branching, taking 2 branches with the 2 least probabilities for A1 and A2. So, I have a small tree here, these are the 2 branches 0.25 and 0.3. I have assigned again 1 to the lower branch, 0 to the upper branch by my convention. Okay. So, now I have an emerging branch where after addition the probability is 0.455 here, 0.45 here. Okay. So, I again combine them, the probability has to, this process has to terminate somewhere depending on the number of symbols here, and here it has terminated here because we had only 5 letters, fine, and the added probability in any case has to be 1.00, otherwise there is something missing, some letter has not been included really. So, when this process stops, that is the stop. Okay. When the process has stopped, now I can read out the corresponding binary representation of the source letters. Okay. For convenience, we read from outside towards inside, okay, and go on writing the letters from MSB to LSB. though there is no sense of MSB LSB here really, just from the left to right if I may say so really. So, to find the representation of A1 with the highest probability, I start from this branch, I go to this branch really, I follow this path, and what I get is, you can read out, this is the path, I encounter 0 here, so 0 here, I encounter another 0 here, another 0 here. So, A1 is being represented by 0 0. So, then what is the representation of A2? Again I follow the same path, okay, 0 1, 0 here, okay, 0 here, I was making a mistake, okay, you should not do that, and then 1 here, that is the style. So, you can read out that way the representation for each letter and can verify if there is any further mistake in this table. Okay. So, now if you look at this representation, it is an example of a variable length coding scheme, source coding scheme. The length is not the same, here it is 2, for the first 3 letters it is 2, for the last 2 letters it is 3. Okay. And then you can quickly verify whether the prefix condition is violated here. Hopefully, it is not violated. Okay. Fine. And it is easy to calculate now n bar. How much is n bar? 2.2 bits per letter, isn't it? Okay. By the simple scheme of assigning 3 bits for each letter, because there are number more than 4 letters here, would have resulted in an n bar of 3 bits per letter, and that was a fixed length coding scheme. Okay. For a fixed length coding scheme, without learning this scheme really, because there are 5 symbols, I would have assigned 3 bits for representation of each, when I would not have considered the corresponding probability, isn't it? But this, here is an advantage of including the probability, we could reduce the average number of bits per letter. Okay. So, on an average, I can represent each letter for this source of this source with 2.2 bits only, rather than 3 kind of. We have just now found the limits of this n bar really. It should be between hx and hx plus 1. I leave it for you to calculate the hx for this source, should be possible, okay, and see that this value is close to hx. It is within, certainly within hx plus 1, okay, and it is somewhere in between, value of 2.2. Okay. Now, you can imagine a little bit, instead of such a small source alphabet, if the alphabet was really bigger, to make the situation more realistic, perhaps you can save a great amount, and asymptotically I can say that, well, after using this kind of variable length source coding scheme of Huffman, okay, one can ultimately expect hx bits per source letter from a source.
hx plus 1 bit of.
See, lower limit is hx. Issue is you should expect it to be anywhere between this. Now, when the source alphabet is larger and the probability distribution is quite favorable really, you can hope to get very close to hx rather than hx plus 1. This 1 is a very large quantity here really. Okay. So, usually I mean for coding source letters, the value will be rather closer to hx rather than hx plus 1 really. In any case, it should not be hx more than hx plus 1. That is for you to verify if you are making mistake anywhere. Yeah, hx bits per letter, because n bar unit is so many bits per letter. Okay. So, on an average, if you give me a source with variable with different probabilities, rather nice distribution of probabilities for the source letters and with good number of letters, I can roughly say that, well, from this source on an average I should be able to code after Huffman coding, okay, in a binary form such that hx bits on an average can be allocated to each letter. Is that okay? Fine. So, this is the only one example that we will consider in this course really. And yes, please, any question?
Why we started the branching
from here? It's in fact, yeah, because we had a probability of 0.45 here at this point, okay, and now we can find 0.45 is larger than 0.25 and even 0.3. The rule says, okay, always consider 2 least probable cases. So that we started with these 2, but after we have reached here, now the 2 least probable cases are for A1 and A2 here. So, we have to consider that. It is not that we have to continue in one direction. We have always to consider 2 least probable cases. Is that okay?
So, assigning the higher number of bits to least probable highest number of bits to the least probable source
Yes.
letter.
Yeah.
It's just a way of reducing the number of source letters, number of bits per letter we have.
After coding, after coding.
It's just a way of reducing the number of bits per letter.
Yes, yes, that's what we promised for source coding, if you remember. Okay, if the input bit stream, the source letters might have been represented in a binary form somewhere, and if that corresponding rate was RB, after this coding, now the rate is less than that. Okay, RB prime or something we noted there. So that's the advantage of this, and while doing this, we did not disturb any feature of the source letter really. So we say it's a compaction kind of coding. We don't distort information, but still it is possible to reduce the average bit rate per source letter. The what average comes in, of course, because we have taken advantage of probability. Yes.
RB and HX are related. RB and HX are related.
Again, RB when you viewed is in terms of bits per second or something. Okay. Here we are talking about only bits. Here bit is the unit of information, and there bit was binary digit per second. Okay, it is easy to extend there, but I am not doing it deliberately to save time. Basically, it is easy because if I have one source letter per unit time per second, now I can say as if my coder output will give me n bar bits per second. So that's the time dimension. I can bring in one. Okay, so the time dimension can be easily brought in really. So fundamentally, if we deal with hx and n bar etc., I get the same idea. For example, if I assume that my source letters are being generated at the rate of 1 letter per second. Okay. So now after source coding, I can say that as if from the source coder output, I am getting n bar bits per second. That's it.
Sir, the larger the alphabet is for the source,
Yeah.
the more will the entropy be. Is there can we say that the larger the alphabet is?
He has a good question, interesting question. What he says is, if the source alphabet is larger, is it that the entropy is higher?
Yes. Yes.
How do you say that?
Because actually is equal to log 2k. That is equality.
Yes.
If the k is more than, so there is a good chance that hx will also be more.
Hx may be as much as log of k kind of thing. Yeah, yeah.
But entropy represents more the rate of the information compared to the source rather than the total amount of information.
Right.
So that way, I mean, you can't actually say that the alphabet is larger, the entropy will be more. More depends on what is the rate that it's coming.
Which rate you are talking about, per second or per unit time? But in our discussion of entropy etc., we did not bring in the concept of time yet.
So entropy represents the amount of information coming out of per second.
Per letter, per symbol, per letter or per symbol, I say, from the source output. The average amount of information, entropy, the parameter that we defined was, what was that? The average amount of information that you get per letter of the source. There is no direct sense of time really. It is not essential there. Okay. Yes. So usually it is like that. Okay. But still it cannot be generalized. It all depends on the probability distribution. Okay. So yes, in general, if k, the alphabet size is large and both are equal, I mean both have got good kind of probability distribution, then yes, I mean with larger size the entropy is larger.
So in that case, if the
One at a time. Yeah. Yeah.
so in that case, if the character is larger, and we have a larger set of alphabets coming out of the source,
Right.
so the information per symbol is reduced.
Is increased.
So symbol
Probability, see,
okay.
the average probability, if they are equally likely, even then it goes down, na?
Yes, sir.
So that increases the information. Yes, there was one other question.
If we go on increasing the size of the alphabet, then automatically our average number of the code word, average code word length will be closer and closer to entropy. Because the
Again, it depends on the probability distribution.
that's for sure.
Huh? So it's an interesting point to think.
Because here in this case if we are having 0.3 and 0.25, so 0.35 is changed to a value more than 0.45.
Yes, yes, you could get one single bit for representing a1 and then 4 bits for representing a5. Yes, and n bar would be different. Yes, so probability measure wherever possible is a very important issue. Okay, for this kind of coding, source coding. Any other questions?
Sir,
Yes.
sir, the Huffman coding is not unique. So, do we get all same n bar? Means n bar is same for all the means if we.
So long as the alphabet is same, okay, you get the same n bar. Alphabet means ensemble is the same. Alphabet with its corresponding probability distribution. The ensemble, so long as the ensemble is the same, that the source is the same, you get the same. Is that okay? Fine. So with that I conclude our discussion on source coding. We will quickly go to the next block. What was that? Channel coding, isn't it? So we will briefly take up maybe in this class and to some extent in the next class the issue of error control coding. Okay. I shall start with a brief classification so that you at least know the existence of some types of codes. At a broad level, an error control code is classified either as a block code or as a tree code. This tree code is also popularly known as convolutional code. Convolutional code. Though there are examples of tree codes where the code is not strictly convolutional code, but a very important class of tree code is this class of convolutional codes. Okay. In fact, we had some ideas on channel coding earlier, though I said please wait for some time really, where you were talking about some parity here and there. Do you remember that? Okay. In fact, that concept of parity is very nicely applicable for block codes. Okay. And if you would like to help me again, you can comment whether it was something like this, that in a block code we consider the bits, say again for binary case, the bits will be considered in blocks or groups. A block or group of k bits will be considered at a time for the purpose of encoding and transmission, etc., and also for decoding. So, encoding and decoding usually operate on a block by block basis. Okay. So, if I draw this in this diagram, suppose I indicate that a group or block of k bits, this bit is applicable for binary coding, we will also talk about binary, non-binary, in general block of k symbols. Okay. Let me consider a block of k symbols, k information symbols, can I say, okay, from the output of source coder if there was a source coder, or from the information source directly if there was no source coder, I consider a group of or block of k symbols. Okay. Then we do what is known as encoding, and after encoding we add some more symbols on that, so that my block size now increases. Okay. I add a few more symbols here, and the total length, say it becomes n symbols, n coded symbols. K where, let me write info symbols, original information symbols. After encoding we add a few more symbols in a block code. Okay. Now, when I say a group of k information symbols is taken at a time, and after during encoding we are generating a few more information symbols, how many, it is clear, n minus k, isn't it? N minus k symbols are generated by encoding. I also mean that these n minus k symbols are generated from this group of k symbols. You should not think that this n minus k additional symbols are generated from previous blocks, etc., etc. No. Okay. So, a group of k information symbols are taken, encoded following some scheme, and then as a result of that we get a few extra symbols n minus k as generated from this block of k symbols. So, we say after encoding we have got this whole pattern is also known as a code word. Code word again is a block of n symbols, okay, where a code word is a block or group of n symbols generated from a smaller length block of k information symbols. Is that okay? Fine. Now, once this is encoded, further processing is done on that, modulation, transmission, etc. And when it comes to decoder, again the whole block is considered, and the purpose of decoding is to what? Is to consider this block of n symbols, that means a full code word, and try to, as best as possible, try to recover or get back or decode this block of k information symbols. When it is done successfully, we say the decoding is successful. Okay. What may happen during transmission? Can you guess quickly to such a block of code word? Some errors, isn't it? Some error may occur. If I now say, I mean, show these as some bit positions or symbol positions like this, okay, something may have gone wrong during transmission, so that the position here may be different from what it was earlier. The symbol value, or in case of binary one, the bit may have got inverted in the process of transmission and reception, and the job of the decoder is to take care of this. Please note that error can happen during the message portion. It can also occur in the additional portion. This portion is known as, these additional symbols are known as parity symbols. P-A-R-I-T-Y, parity symbols. So, during transmission error can occur in the information symbol or in the parity symbol or in both of them even. If there are multiple errors, okay, if the channel is very bad, then there may be more than one errors in the code word, and the job of the decoder is to try to remove all these errors as possible, but there are limitations really. All coders cannot remove all errors. Yes, please.
Does the symbol means the voltage level?
Symbol means
Voltage level.
voltage levels. Well, for our discussion so far, voltage level is not necessary. We talk about voltages or currents when we discuss very specifically about signal, electrical signal. Now, we are still continuing with the information theoretic approach applied on the two important blocks of source coding and channel coding. Okay. For this discussion, I need not say whether this is a voltage or current. Can you just ask one more question saying why are you asking about whether it is voltage or current?
What are these symbols?
The symbols are some logical representations, like in a binary form they are logic 1s and logic 0s. Okay. The reason I am noting symbol here is that there are error control codes where they not only consider one binary digit of 1 and 0, they may consider a smaller group of 4 bits together viewed as one symbol, which means one can go for a coding scheme based on a group of pattern, group of 16 symbols, okay, and one can go for error correction, encoding example, decoding scheme, etc., etc. Fine. So, the voltage level or signal level is not important at this point. Is that okay? Any other question? Okay. So, that is block coding. We will get back to block coding. In fact, we will consider a simple example, and the example will belong to this class of block codes. This is easier to, more intuitive for understanding.
What is the mechanism of detecting the error?
Yeah, that's the most important issue. I mean, one important issue really, and once detected, how do you correct them, isn't it? So, we will have a brief intuitive idea about that. As I said, really, I mean, we can't go on discussing with that really. I mean, we will have a brief intuitive idea first, and then again we will consider a simple code of Hamming code perhaps, where we will see that yes, it can be corrected. Okay. In comparison to block codes, tree codes have a somewhat different structure. Okay. sometimes we say tree or convolutional codes have some memory, okay. And to give a brief idea of CONV, I am writing in short, of a convolutional encoder as it looks like. Very simple to design and implement a convolutional encoder. Here is a simple example. The 3-bit shift register, okay, 3 flip flops here, and this is my input point. This is a binary convolutional coder for ease of understanding, and most of the convolutional codes incidentally are binary in nature, whereas there are many good block codes which are non-binary in nature. But convolutional codes are usually binary, though there are some non-binary convolutional codes also. So, as if binary bit streams are entering this shift register stage, okay, fine. Now, what we do is that we generate we tap this shift register and well fine. This is a hypothetical example, not necessarily a very good convolutional code really. See, the idea is that one information bit comes into it, okay. Even if, and we assume that initially the shift register was initialized to 0, and then the first bit comes. When the bit comes here, I get 2 outputs, isn't it? What are the 2 outputs? For 1 I get 1 1, isn't it? So, for the first bit I get 1 1 if I go on writing backward, okay. When the second bit comes, what do I get? 1 comes here, 0 comes here. What do I get? I am writing C1 first, C2 like this. So, I get 0 here, 1 here. So, I get 1 0 like this, isn't it? Okay. Similarly, when the next bit comes, what do I get? 1 0 1. You can tell me the corresponding 2 outputs. 1 0 1 means 0 for C2, isn't it? 0 and 1, is it something like that? Huh? Pardon? These are XOR gates. These gates are XOR gates. Fine. So, when the next bit comes, it becomes 1 1 0 1. Let me use a different color pen. 1 1 0 1. Tell me quickly the corresponding code words. I am getting lost. Both are 0, is it? Yeah, 0 0, and like that it goes on. So, that is the encoding style. There are a few interesting points here. One is that both are XOR gates. One is that for each bit we get 2 bits, okay. So, we bring in one parameter which is code rate. How many bits are generated for how many information bits, okay. So, here it is as if for 1 bit we are getting 2 bits. So, the code rate usually indicated as capital R is 1 by 2. For 1 bit we get 2 coded bits, okay. Usually for convolutional codes, these code rates are limited. So, this is a rate half code we say sorry, the code rate could be 1/3 even. Say if I just ask you to generate a convolutional code of rate 1/3, you could think of doing that also. Yes, another output. That means you could perhaps bring in another XOR gate, tap, say this output is untapped, and say this output again here, and you could say that okay, as if this is C3. Right. So, with a very simple structure, by using a few XOR gates and some flip flops, you can design and implement, I mean, a convolutional encoder of different rates. But all these codes are not very good really. One has to wait, one has to go for certain other properties of these generated code words, etc. Okay. But yes, please.
For each bit entering the system
Encoder, yeah.
encoder,
Hmm.
you are getting 2 bits of the output.
Yeah.
So why should the rate be half? You are not waiting for the next bit to come in.
We are not waiting. If you now think in terms of time, because the 0 comes after some bit TB amount of time, for in every TB, one information bit goes into the encoder, I get 2 coded bits. Okay. So, by the time the next information bit of 0 comes, I should be ready, both these bits should be given out, so that the next bit can be again encoded, and during the next TB interval 2 more code word bits can be generated. Okay. So, if I define T of C as the duration of a coded bit and T of B as the duration of the bit information bit at its input, how much is TB is twice of TC, is it not? That means the rate after that, say for serial transmission, I am using a switch here, commutating switch. Okay. So, yeah, this here, sorry, I missed that explanation really. As if I am using a switch, the switch is rotating fast really. What is this operation called? Muxing, isn't it? So, I am muxing, 2:1 muxing basically. So, I am so the mux clock rate has to be twice the input rate basically, it is like that. Okay. So, the bit rate, serial bit rate here after coding is twice the bit rate here. Okay.
What is the purpose of muxing?
Because usually you need some kind of serial output from the encoder. Okay. If you do not need, give these 2 outputs at a time, 2 bits at a time at the same rate as that of TB, okay, a pair over a duration of TB. It depends on the requirement of the subsequent block. What is our subsequent block in the chain? If you, okay, you may find some kind of pulse shaping unit or something, or some baseband processing unit. So, depending on its requirement, you may feed these bits in parallel or in serial form. Usually it is in serial form. Okay.
The
Yeah.
bit rate is doubled and you say that the code rate is half.
Yes, by definition, that for every information, how many code word bits, I mean for one information bit, how many code word bits, the information bit is put in the numerator and the code word bits at denominator. In fact, the same definition of rate was applicable for the block code as well. For the block code, the code rate was k by n, the number of information bits divided by total number of bits after encoding. Okay. Bit rate is doubled for this rate of code. Yes, bit rate is doubled. Yes.
Pulse rate modulated can also be represented in
Sorry, I missed your question.
pulse rate modulation.
Pulse width modulation can
Can be somewhat be like that, and like for representing one, there is a big sequence of frame going. The width is like there is very
Are you talking about the source coding scheme or this this error control coding scheme?
this error.
Yeah.
So in that, for representing one, there may be a sequence of 1 1 1 0 1 1 1 1 0.
Okay.
And for representing 0, it's like 0 0 0 1 0 0 0 0.
Well, you see, you won't like to spend so many ones and zeros to represent or to encode 1 1, because then if you think in terms of code rate, the code rate becomes lower than half really. So, like 1 1/3, 1/4, etc. And this had a disadvantage. See, when he is worrying about doubling the bit rate, he has some concern perhaps. See, just now we are talking about source coding where we are trying to reduce the bit rate, is it not? Now suddenly we are talking about increasing the bit rate by 2 in this case of rate of code. Isn't it? It's of concern, because then what are you achieving? What are you trying for really? Because any increase in bit rate means an increase in bandwidth, transmission bandwidth.
So it all depends whether what you want exactly. Like if you just want to detect whether there was an error in receiving,
Yeah.
and if you want that, you want to also remove that error.
Yeah.
So
I want both. I want both.
You want both.
Yeah.
Then it's not always like in the remote control. It's always the same thing. They have a very big trend for a very small signal.
Okay.
Why it is so?
So when you talk about a specific example, really, I mean there may be other reasons, really. Okay. I mean, we are trying to discuss only the basic issue of the problem and trying to understand it intuitively. Okay. But there are very interesting stories inside, really. If you go on, see, it all depends on. See, one should not choose an error control coding scheme arbitrarily. one has to know what is the ultimate requirement, how good is the channel, how noisy is that channel going to be, what kind of modulation scheme is going to be used. This means what kind of demodulation scheme is going to be used. Demodulation is a very important issue in the design of digital communication systems. Okay. So, with knowledge of all those schemes, perhaps it is I mean you are in a position to decide about the code parameters and the code rate. Arbitrary choice of code rate will mean increase in bit rate and increase in extra bandwidth. Now, bandwidth being a very natural resource like transmission power, one has to be very cautious really. Okay. Just to cut it short really, let me tell you, this specific rate of half, okay, has been standardized in many practical systems, not with this arbitrarily chosen encoder scheme. There are good ways of choosing the connection polynomial, the steps etc., and they are all listed and known now, you need not research once again. But ultimately for a code rate of half, I mean a bigger like code with 7-bit shift register and things like that, things have been standardized for applications in many wireless communication systems, including satellite based communication systems, including your wireless handsets and many other systems. So, rate half that way has been acceptable because for this kind of coding the decoding is very efficient. They call it an optimum kind of decoding, and incidentally let me just mention that decoding scheme is popularly known as Viterbi decoding scheme or Viterbi algorithm. You may hear about this here and there really. That reflects, that indicates a very efficient or near optimum or optimum decoding scheme applied to convolutional code. So, this kind of simple encoder structure with a very powerful decoder scheme of Viterbi algorithm gives you a lot of advantage in coding, and hence even though it may require twice the transmission bandwidth, if modulation format etc. is not changed, this is still preferred. And not only that, in some more hostile situations like when there are deep fading in mobile environments etc., people have also standardized this rate of 1/3. But a still lower rate code, some cases will need too much of extra bandwidth or extra bit rate etc. So, that is to be avoided if possible. Usually the code rate, ideal situation would be that the code rate is 1, isn't it, which means no additional information over there, but that there is no coding part in that really. So, in practice wherever possible the code rate should be pushed towards 1.0, but it can never be 1.0, it will always be less than 1. Okay. So, if you come out with a value which is between 1/3 and 1.0, 0.3 and 1.0, your scheme, your code rate may be acceptable in some situations.
We are talking about variable length channel.
No, we are not really. I mean, though there are concepts of variable coding rate schemes nowadays, I mean, at the moment we are not talking about that. What I was talking about is that you understand the situations, find about the other blocks in the whole system really, get a closer idea about the hostility of the channel, get closer idea about how nice the receiver is going to be designed, okay, and then choose your coding scheme etc. if possible.
So is it necessary that this coding scheme be unique? Because a combination of three.
Very good guess really. The way I started showing C1, C2, C3, it is very easy that okay, one can come out with any other possible tapping really, so it need not be unique.
So for a particular 3 bits,
here
for C1, C2 could be say 1, 1 for a different set of values. So is that possible?
Sorry, I didn't get. I mean, see the input and output of the shift registers, they are not being affected by these taps, isn't it? So they are simply the bit stream, incoming bit stream. They are going out and going out. I mean, going in and going out, isn't it? So for some time only their effects are considered here through this XOR gates, and that's what is the encoding operation. Repeat your question once.
So what will we be transmitting ultimately?
We will be transmitting this
Bit stream plus C1, C2.
No, we will not transmit this bit stream. We will only transmit C1, C2.
So when we are transmitting C1, C2, suppose we transmit C1, C2 as 0, 1.
Right.
So 0, 1 could be generated by a different set of values.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I was coming to that. That was the next important feature of convolutional code. Okay, is that if you now look at the incoming bit stream, you can see that for the same one, which was the first bit, and the third bit in our incoming information sequence, do we have the same code words? These are the code words now. Code word of 2 bits really. For the first one, we had a code word of 1, 1. For the second one, though the information bit was same, I have a different code word of 0, 1. That's a very interesting feature of convolutional code. We will not see this for the block code. Okay. For the block code, when the information block is the same, I will always get the same code word. Whereas here, when I say the rate is half, as if I mean 1 bit is taken, is encoded to get 2 bits. So a code word is of 2 bits as if. Okay. but then the same one does not give the same code word. Why? What is the reason? You can guess. Because, pardon?
It's the start bit, the first one was the start bit, and it depends.
It is a start bit and the whole thing was initialized, and it need not be start bit. Even if you consider the next one, see, I have another one after this really. If you consider, I think it was 0 0, if that is correct really, I have got a different pattern once again. That is fundamentally because this information bit, it is not getting lost. See, that is a difference with block coding. For block code, once encoding is done for a group of k block, k symbols, that k information symbols are no more necessary for encoding. Whereas here, if I consider this one as one group of 1 bit being encoded to give 2 bits, this one remains inside this encoder, and it affects the subsequent code word pairs for quite some time till this one gets flushed out from this shift register stage. So, this one or the information sequence is memorized for some time depending on how many bits, how many shift register stages I have used really. So, we loosely say that these convolutional codes have got memory, whereas the block codes in this sense do not have memory really. Okay. But anyway, the number of possibilities for a particular information bit of 1 at the output is not infinite. If you just consider a longer sequence, you will come to know that it will be only finite, dictated by the number of stages and the tap connections really. Okay. So, they determine, there is no randomness as such really, but the point is that for same information bit I will get different looking code words. Yes, because the code words are generated not only from this one bit, it is also decided by what all, at least 3 previous bits which are still there in the encoder. So, convolutional encoder has memory. Yes, please.
Is there any relationship between the code rate and the probability of error?
Yes, it is.
So we are deciding over a code rate depending upon what the
See, I will put it in a, his question, is it understood? He says that is there any relationship between the code rate and the memory, code rate and the error correction capability.
sorry, code rate and the probability of having error.
Probability of
Having error. Like we know that we have this much probability that we will get an error.
okay.
Upon that we are deciding our code rate.
Probability of having an error is something different. That there will be error in the received code word is dictated mostly by channel, isn't it? Channel, the discrete channel, if I may say so. But I was, yes, okay. So, that depends on the discrete channel nature, the behavior of the channel. What I was talking about is that whether the error correcting capability of the decoder, it is related to the code rate, not very in an explicit way, but in indirect way, and that is a matter to be studied. One has to investigate the decoding algorithm and find that ultimately they are related.
So Viter B is white T or
VITER BI, Viter B. Is it time today? Viter B algorithm is a famous algorithm used for decoding convolutional codes. Let me also tell that there was another popular algorithm, a bit obsolete now, but still is very useful, which is known as sequential decoding algorithm. Sequential decoding algorithm. Sequence, from sequence, the word sequential is derived. I will take 1 minute to complete this tree. So, we had some initial discussion about block and tree code. Okay. This block code again can be subdivided in 2 major ways. One is non-binary, you can guess perhaps, okay, and then a block code can be divided as binary block code or non-binary block code. So, for a binary block code, these symbols are ones and zeros. For non-binary block codes, each symbol may consist of a group of bits, binary digits as well, okay, or letters. Both non-binary and binary block codes can be divided further as systematic, non-systematic. Before I close, this example which I gave for the block code, where the information symbols appeared first and then as if the parity symbols were appended there, is a systematic form of encoding. In a non-systematic form, these information symbols would not appear unaltered in a specific position. One that would get mixed in an indirect form such that their effect is there, nothing is lost in the process, but you could not identify them directly. In fact, if you think a little bit, this convolutional code output was a non-systematic output really. These information bits were not directly visible here, okay, whereas the block code example was a systematic example. Let us stop here today. Thank you.